I signed away everything I'd built for 13 years, and everyone thought I'd lost my mind. But when my husband's lawyer turned pale at that final hearing, I knew exactly what I'd won. My name is Meredith Walsh, and at 35 years old, I'd spent more than a third of my life building someone else's dream. I met Derek Carlson when I was 19, fresh-faced and eager, working as a legal assistant at Morrison & Associates downtown. He was 26 then, impossibly charming with his tailored suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and eyes that crinkled when he smiled like he was letting you in on a secret. He'd come into the office to file incorporation papers for his new real estate development company, and I remember thinking how confident he seemed, how certain that success was just around the corner waiting for him to catch up. He asked me out that same afternoon, right there in the lobby with my boss, probably watching from his corner office. 3 months later, we were engaged. 6 months after that, I was pregnant and walking down the aisle in my grandmother's vintage lace dress, the one she'd carefully preserved in tissue paper and cedar, the one that smelled like her lavender sachets and hope. I was 20 years old and believed I knew everything about love. Owen came into the world on a Tuesday morning in March. 7 pounds and 3 ounces of pure miracle with Derek's dark hair and my green eyes. I took 6 weeks of maternity leave, then went back to Morrison & Associates because we needed the income. Derek's company was still finding its footing, still more vision than revenue. I'd nurse Owen during lunch breaks in the supply closet, my dress shirt buttoned wrong half the time from rushing, my legal pads covered in notes about zoning ordinances and contract clauses alongside doodles of tiny baby feet. For the first 4 years, we scraped by. I worked full-time while Owen went to daycare, the kind with cheerful murals painted by volunteers and toys that had been loved by 3 generations of children. Derek worked around the clock, chasing investors, sketching building plans on napkins during dinner, his eyes always focused on some distant horizon I couldn't quite see. We lived in a small apartment where the radiator clanked like it was angry at the world, where I'd hear our neighbors arguing through walls so thin I knew their fight patterns better than I knew my own husband's schedule. Then, when Owen was 4 and I was 24, everything shifted. Derek landed his first major contract, a mixed-use development on the east side that suddenly put his name on everyone's lips. Money started flowing in, real money, the kind that meant we could afford a house with a yard and a second car. But it also meant Derek needed help, someone he could trust completely, someone who understood the business from those early napkin sketch days. "Leave the law firm," he said one night over Chinese takeout, the kind we used to eat sitting on our bed because we didn't have a proper dining table. "Come work with me full-time. I need you, Mer. You know this business as well as I do. You've been living and breathing it with me since day one." I hesitated. I'd worked hard at Morrison & Associates, earned my paralegal certification through night classes while pregnant, built relationships with attorneys who respected my work. But Derek's eyes held that familiar gleam, that certainty that made you want to believe in his vision. And he was right. I did know the business. I'd reviewed every contract, offered suggestions on proposals, stayed up late helping him prepare presentations while Owen slept in his crib nearby. "What would my title be?" I asked, already knowing I'd say yes, but wanting to hear him acknowledge my value. "Partner," he said without hesitation. "We're building this together, aren't we?" Except there was no official partnership agreement, no salary, no benefits, no title on any paperwork. I became the unpaid backbone of Carlson Development, the invisible engine that kept everything running while Derek stood in front of investors in those expensive suits, shaking hands and signing deals. I managed the books, coordinated with contractors, handled client relations, designed marketing materials, researched zoning laws, and somehow still made it home in time to help Owen with homework and cook dinner. For 11 years, I worked without a single paycheck with my name on it. Every dollar that came in went into the business account, then into our joint household account that Derek controlled. He'd give me a credit card for groceries and Owen's expenses, and I never questioned it because I believed we were building our future together. I believed that partner meant something even without the paperwork. People would ask what I did for a living, and I'd smile and say, I help my husband with his business, which was like saying the foundation helps a building stand. Technically true, but wildly understating its importance. At school functions, other mothers would discuss their careers while I'd nod along, feeling somehow less than, even though I knew I worked just as hard as any of them. Derek would introduce me at business dinners as my wife, never my business partner, never the woman who built this company with me. But I told myself it didn't matter, because we were a team. When Owen asked why Mommy didn't get paid like Daddy, I explained that families share everything, that money all goes to the same place anyway. I was teaching him about partnership, about working together toward common goals. I was being a good wife, a supportive partner, exactly what I thought I was supposed to be. The changes started small, so gradual, I barely noticed them shifting. Derek began staying late at the office 3 nights a week, then 4, then 5. Business dinners that used to include me suddenly became boring contractor meetings that I'd hate. He started criticizing little things, the way I'd organized his files, the coffee I'd made being too weak, my suggestion about a marketing strategy being not quite right for the vision. When I'd try to discuss business decisions, he'd pat my hand and say, "Don't worry about it, Mur. I've got this handled." Like I was a child who'd asked too many questions about adult matters. Like I hadn't spent 11 years learning every aspect of this business from the ground up. 3 years before everything fell apart, I was doing what I did every Tuesday afternoon, reconciling accounts, making sure invoices matched payments, tracking expenses against our budget projections. It was mindless work by then, muscle memory, my fingers flying across the keyboard while my mind wandered to whether Owen needed new soccer cleats and what I'd make for dinner. Then I saw it. A transfer I didn't recognize. $8,500 to an account ending in 7321. I pulled up our master list of vendor accounts, contractor payments, everything legitimate. Nothing matched. I went back through 6 months of statements, and there it was again and again. Sometimes 8,000, sometimes 12,000, once 23,000, all to the same account number, all marked as operational expenses in Derek's handwriting. My hands went cold. I opened a new browser window and started digging, using the account research skills I'd learned back at Morrison and Associates. It took me 2 hours, but I found it. A personal account in Derek's name only, one I'd never known existed. Over the past 3 years, he'd transferred approximately $420,000 into it. I should have confronted him right then. A different woman might have. But I'd learned something important during my years watching legal proceedings at the law firm. People reveal more when they think they're safe than when they know they're caught. So instead of confronting Derek, I opened a new spreadsheet and started documenting everything with the methodical precision I'd learned from the best attorneys at Morrison and Associates. What I found over the next 3 months made my blood run cold. Our beautiful house, the one everyone admired with its craftsman details and updated kitchen, had 3 separate mortgages totaling $950,000. The original purchase mortgage, then a home equity line Derek took out 2 years ago, then another refinance 8 months back. Together, they added up to more than the house was worth. I pulled comparable sales in our neighborhood, and our home would appraise at maybe $720,000 on a good day. The company accounts told an even worse story. Carlson Development looked successful from the outside, with our sleek offices and steady stream of projects. But we owed $420,000 in combined debts, $98,000 in unpaid taxes from the last 2 years, $135,000 to various suppliers and contractors, $72,000 in maxed-out business credit cards, and $15,000 to our accountant, who'd apparently been working on payment plans for months. The three luxury cars Derek insisted we needed, the Range Rover, the BMW, and the Tesla, weren't owned. They were leased with balloon payments at the end that would total $95,000 if we wanted to keep them. And those cryptocurrency investments Derek had mentioned casually over dinner, he'd lost $150,000 when the market crashed. The sports betting app on his phone that I'd thought was just for fun? $65,000 in losses over 2 years. But the worst discovery came on a Thursday evening in October, when I was reviewing credit card statements and saw charges from a furnished apartment complex across town. Regular monthly payments of $4,200, going back 7 months. Furniture delivery from a high-end store. Groceries for 2. Wine from the expensive shop downtown. Flowers delivered every Friday afternoon. Derek had a second apartment, and he wasn't living there alone. I sat in our home office, the one with the window overlooking the yard where Owen used to play as a child, and I did the math with shaking hands. Total debt, approximately $1,600,000. Total assets, if we liquidated everything, maybe $1,400,000 if we were lucky. We were $200,000 underwater, drowning in debt while living in a house that looked like success. My first instinct was rage. I wanted to scream, to throw his precious awards off the shelves, to forward every piece of evidence to his business partners, and watch his reputation crumble. But then I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was 16. Sitting in her kitchen that always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. "Meredith, baby," she'd said, pressing an envelope into my hands with surprising firmness for someone so frail. "You always keep something that's just yours. I don't care if you marry the kindest man in the world. You keep your own money, your own account, something nobody can touch. Promise me." I'd promised, and I'd kept that promise. Every year since I was 23, I'd contributed to a retirement account from the law firm, money that had stayed in my name only. That account now held $150,000. And when Grandma passed away 5 years ago, she'd left me $280,000 in a trust with specific instructions that it should never be commingled with marital assets, that it was for me and Owen only, her way of making sure I'd always have choices. $430,000. Money Derek didn't know about because I'd followed Grandma's advice, because I'd kept something that was just mine. Money he couldn't touch, couldn't gamble away, couldn't use to finance his lies. I sat in that office for 3 hours after my discovery, the autumn darkness pressing against the windows while the numbers on the screen blurred and refocused. $430,000 in protected assets. $1,600,000 in debt that Derek had accumulated while I'd worked for free, building his empire with my bare hands. The math was brutal, but the betrayal cut deeper than any spreadsheet could show. I heard the garage door open around 11:30 that night. Derek's footsteps were heavy on the stairs, the confident stride of a man who believed his secrets were safe. I'd closed all the financial documents and pulled up a recipe website, playing the role I'd perfected over 13 years. The devoted wife waiting up, probably worrying about him working too hard. "Hey, babe," he said, loosening his tie as he walked into the office. His cologne was different, something expensive and unfamiliar. "What are you still doing up?" "Just planning meals for next week," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "How was your meeting?" "Long, tedious. You know how contractors can be." He kissed the top of my head, a gesture that once made me feel cherished, but now felt like a lie pressed against my skin. "I'm exhausted. Coming to bed?" "In a few minutes," I said. "I want to finish this." I listened to him move through our evening routine, the shower running, the news playing quietly in our bedroom, eventually the silence that meant he'd fallen asleep. Only then did I allow myself to breathe fully, to let my hands shake, to feel the weight of what I'd discovered. But I didn't cry. Crying was what the old Meredith would have done, the girl who'd believed in fairy tales, and forever. This Meredith, the one who'd spent 11 years learning business inside and out, who'd navigated complex contracts and difficult negotiations, who'd raised a son while building a company, this Meredith knew that emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. Instead, I made a plan. The next morning, I called my Uncle Frank during my coffee run, the one legitimate errand where Derek wouldn't question why I was on my phone. Uncle Frank was a certified public accountant who'd helped Grandma set up my trust fund. A quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses who'd taught me that numbers never lied, even when people did. "Uncle Frank, I need your help with something sensitive," I said, standing in the parking lot of the coffee shop where nobody knew me. "And I need you to not ask questions right away. Can you do that?" There was a pause. Uncle Frank had known me since I was born, had held me at my baptism, had slipped me $20 bills at family gatherings with a wink. "What do you need, Meredith?" "I need to create an irrevocable trust fund for Owen. I want to move my retirement account and the inheritance from Grandma into it. All $430,000. Protected, untouchable, structured, so that if anything happens to me, Owen gets it for college and his future. And I need it done quietly, within the next 2 weeks." Another pause, longer this time. "Meredith." "Please, Uncle Frank, I'll explain everything later. But right now, I need to know my son will be protected no matter what happens." "I'll have the paperwork ready by Monday," he said quietly. "But sweetie, when you're ready to talk, I'm here." The trust was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon, while Derek was showing a property across town. I signed the documents in Uncle Frank's modest office that smelled like old books and peppermint, and felt the first small measure of control returning to my life. Owen's future was safe. Derek couldn't touch it, couldn't gamble it, couldn't use it to pay down the mountain of debt he'd accumulated. But securing the money was only the first step. I needed to know everything, every debt, every hidden account, every lie. So I started documenting with the same meticulous attention to detail I'd brought to Derek's business for 11 years. Except now I was building a case instead of building his success. I bought a small scanner that I kept hidden in my craft supplies, the kind of place Derek would never look because he'd never once shown interest in the watercolor painting hobby I'd picked up to manage my stress. Every Tuesday and Thursday when Derek worked late, I'd scan documents. Every mortgage statement, every credit card bill, every bank record I could access. I printed copies of the apartment lease using the company printer when Derek was in meetings, buried the pages inside folders marked Owen's school records that Derek would never open. I found the apartment complex address in his GPS history and drove past it on a Saturday afternoon when Derek took Owen to a baseball game. It was expensive, the kind of building with a doorman and underground parking, the kind of place that charged $4,200 a month for a one-bedroom because it had granite countertops and a city view. I sat in my car across the street and watched a young woman leave the building around 3 in the afternoon, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her figure poured into workout clothes that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She looked young, maybe 27 or 28, with that effortless confidence of someone who'd never had to reconcile accounts or wonder if her value was measured in unpaid labor. I didn't know her name yet, but I recognized her type. Derek had always been drawn to polish and shine, to things that looked expensive, even if they were financed with other people's money. I drove home and filed the information away with everything else, building a picture of Derek's double life piece by piece. The apartment, the girlfriend, the debts. The lies stacked so high I wondered how he kept them all straight, but I still didn't confront him. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream the truth across our beautiful debt-soaked house, to make him explain every dollar, every lie, every moment he'd looked me in the eye and pretended we were partners. But I'd watched enough legal proceedings to know that anger was a weakness in negotiation. Information was power. Patience was strategy. So I waited. And I documented. And I played the role of devoted wife so perfectly that Derek never suspected the foundation he'd built his lies on was crumbling beneath his feet. Owen turned 15 that March, and we threw him a party in our backyard with the custom pizza oven Derek had installed last summer. Another expense that probably went on a credit card I'd find later. My son had grown tall and quiet, spending more time in his room with headphones on than talking to either of us. I wondered sometimes what he heard through our bedroom walls, what he'd absorbed from watching his father come home later and later, from seeing his mother smile through everything like it didn't hurt. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Owen said that night after the party, after we'd cleaned up and Derek had disappeared into his office for just a few emails. "Of course, sweetheart." I was loading the dishwasher, my hands moving through the familiar motions while my mind cataloged the newest credit card statement I'd found that afternoon. "Why do you do all the work for Dad's company, but your name isn't on anything?" I froze, a plate suspended halfway to the rack. "What do you mean?" "I was applying for college prep programs, and they asked about my parents' occupations. I started to write that you work for Carlson Development, but then I realized your name isn't on the website. It's not on the office door. It's not anywhere." He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly too old, too knowing. "You built that company with him. Everyone knows it. Why isn't your name on it?" I should have had an answer ready. I'd had 15 years to prepare for this question. But standing in our kitchen with my teenage son looking at me like he'd just discovered I'd been lying about something fundamental, I found I had no words that wouldn't sound like excuses. "It's complicated, Owen," I finally said. "That's what people say when they don't want to tell you the truth," he replied quietly, and walked away before I could respond. That night, I added another item to my growing list of things Derek had taken from me: my son's respect. Owen had watched me work myself to exhaustion for a man who wouldn't even put my name on the business cards. He'd learned from his father's example that a woman's labor could be valuable without being valued, that contribution didn't require recognition, that partner was just a word people said to make you feel included while they made all the decisions. 2 weeks later, I was inputting vendor payments when I noticed another irregularity. Derek had paid $68,000 to a law firm I didn't recognize, Hastings and Associates, in 3 installments over the past 4 months. We had a regular corporate attorney, Mitchell Brennan, who'd been with us for years. Why would Derek hire a different firm? I called the number listed on the invoice, using my most professional voice. "Good afternoon. This is Meredith calling from Carlson Development. I'm reconciling our accounts and noticed several payments to your firm. Could you tell me which matter these relate to?" There was a pause, the sound of typing. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but those payments are marked as personal legal services for Mr. Carlson. I can't discuss the details without his authorization." "Personal legal services, not business. Personal." "I understand," I said smoothly. "Thank you for your time." I hung up and sat very still, my mind racing. $68,000 in personal legal fees. There were only so many reasons someone would need that kind of legal work. Estate planning, maybe. But we'd done our wills 3 years ago. Tax issues, possibly. But we had an accountant for that. Or divorce preparation. Hiring attorneys, strategizing asset protection, building a case. Derek was planning to leave me. He was spending our money I'd helped earn through 11 years of unpaid labor, to pay lawyers who would help him take everything while leaving me with nothing. The realization should have devastated me, but instead, I felt something cold and clear settle into my chest. Derek thought he was 10 steps ahead, carefully orchestrating his exit while I played the oblivious wife. He had no idea that I'd been building my own case for months, that every document he'd carelessly left accessible was now scanned and stored in 3 different locations: a safe deposit box at a bank across town, an encrypted cloud drive, and a physical folder at my sister's house 2 states away. My sister Rachel was the only person I'd told about any of this. She'd flown in for Owen's birthday party and stayed an extra 2 days, and I'd finally broken down on her last night there, showing her everything I'd discovered. She'd held me while I cried for the first time in months, then helped me organize the evidence into a system that would make any attorney proud. "You're going to destroy him," she'd said, not with vindication but with quiet certainty. "No," I'd replied. "I'm going to let him destroy himself. I'm just going to make sure I'm not standing in the rubble when it happens." 3 months after I found the apartment, 6 months after I'd started documenting everything, Derek's behavior shifted again. He started being nice to me, almost aggressively pleasant. He'd bring home flowers on random Tuesdays, expensive bouquets from the same shop that delivered to his girlfriend's apartment. He'd ask about my day with what seemed like genuine interest, though his eyes would glaze over after 30 seconds. He'd suggest date nights at restaurants we couldn't afford, where he'd hold my hand across the table and talk about our future like we actually had one together. I knew what this was. I'd seen it before in legal cases at Morrison and Associates. The preemptive niceness, the documentary evidence of being a good spouse before filing for divorce. Derek was building his narrative, creating witnesses who could testify that he'd tried to make it work, that the marriage had simply run its course despite his best efforts. So I played along. I smiled over the flowers. I went to the dinners. I let him take photos of us looking happy, that he'd probably show a judge someday as evidence of attempting reconciliation. And every night, after he fell asleep, I added more documents to my collection, built my case stronger, prepared for the war he didn't know I was ready to fight. The girlfriend's name was Amber Hayes, and I found out about her the way I found out about everything else, through careful documentation and patient observation. She worked in Derek's office as a marketing coordinator, a position he'd created 8 months ago and that I'd helped interview candidates for, never knowing he'd already decided who would fill it. I discovered her identity on a Wednesday afternoon when I was dropping off documents Derek had forgotten at home. He'd called me in a panic, insisting he needed the contracts for a 2 o'clock meeting, his voice tight with the stress he claimed was from work, but I now understood was from maintaining his double life. When I arrived at the office, Derek was in a conference room with clients, and Amber was at the front desk covering for the receptionist who'd gone to lunch. "Oh, you must be Meredith," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was even prettier up close, with that practiced Instagram aesthetic, perfect contouring, hair extensions that looked natural, nails that could cut glass. "Derek talks about you all the time." I wondered what version of me lived in Derek's stories to her. The frigid wife, probably. The one who didn't understand him, who'd let herself go, who was more mother than lover. All the tired cliches men told their mistresses to justify their betrayal. "That's nice," I said, matching her fake smile with one of my own. "Could you make sure he gets these? They're urgent." I watched her carry the folder to the conference room, watched her knock softly, and Derek's face light up when he saw her. That same expression he used to give me 12 years ago. She handed him the documents, and his hand brushed hers, a touch that lasted a fraction too long, that spoke volumes about stolen moments and shared secrets. I left before he could see me, drove home with my hands steady on the wheel, and added, "Amber Hayes, marketing coordinator, approximately 27 years old," to my file. Then I did what I did best. I researched. Social media made it almost too easy. Amber's Instagram was public, a carefully curated feed of workout videos, brunch photos, and motivational quotes about knowing your worth. I scrolled back 6 months and found the first photo of her in Derek's office, caption reading, "New beginnings at an amazing company," with hashtags about girl boss energy and following your dreams. What she probably didn't know was that the amazing company was drowning in debt, that Derek's charm came with a price tag measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars, that she was dating a man who was about to lose everything. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The same week I identified Amber, I discovered something else that made my blood run cold. Derek had taken out a life insurance policy on me 6 months ago. A $2 million policy that I'd never been asked to sign. I found the paperwork buried in his desk when I was looking for the property tax bills, tucked between folders like it was nothing, like my death wasn't potentially worth more to him than my life. I called the insurance company pretending to have questions about the policy, and they confirmed it was active, that Derek was the sole beneficiary, that my signature on the application looked legitimate. I stared at that signature for 20 minutes, comparing it to my real handwriting. It was close, but not quite right. Derek had forged my signature. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to my husband in our expensive bed with its high thread count sheets bought on credit, and I wondered if I was safe. If a man could accumulate $1,600,000 in secret debt, maintain a girlfriend in a luxury apartment, forge insurance documents, what else was he capable of? I started being more careful. I told Rachel about the insurance policy, told Uncle Frank, told my friend Sandra from my old law firm who'd become a family attorney. I made sure people knew, made sure there was a trail of documentation that if anything happened to me, investigators would know exactly where to look. And I bought a small safe for my car where I kept copies of everything, updated weekly, just in case. But Derek never tried to hurt me. He was too smart for that, too aware that violence would raise questions. Instead, he hurt me in smaller ways, death by 1,000 cuts disguised as marriage. He started criticizing my appearance more frequently. "You used to take more pride in how you looked," he'd say, eyeing my jeans and sweater as if I was attending a board meeting instead of doing bookkeeping in my home office. This from a man who'd asked me to work 80-hour weeks for free while raising our son, leaving me exactly 0 time for elaborate beauty routines. He'd compare me to other women, never directly, but with pointed observations. "Did you see how polished Jennifer looked at the Richardsons' party? She must spend hours getting ready." Jennifer was a real estate agent. Derek worked with occasionally, a woman with a full-time nanny and a household income that included her own 6-figure salary, not just her husband's debt. He stopped touching me except for those performative date nights, and even then, it felt mechanical, like he was following a script titled "How to Appear Like a Caring Husband." In bed, we were strangers sharing square footage, the space between us growing wider, even as our financial hole grew deeper. Owen noticed. Of course he noticed. 15-year-olds see everything, especially when they're trying to pretend they don't. "Are you and Dad okay?" he asked one Saturday morning, when Derek had left early for another site inspection that I knew was probably brunch with Amber. "We're fine, sweetheart," I lied, the words automatic after years of practice. "Just busy with work." "Mom," he looked at me with those 2 knowing eyes. I'm not a kid anymore. I can tell when things aren't right. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to show him the spreadsheets, the evidence of his father's betrayal, the proof that some men would rather burn everything down than admit they'd failed. But he was still Derek's son, still loved his father despite everything. And I wouldn't be the one to destroy that relationship, even if Derek was perfectly willing to destroy ours. "Relationships go through phases," I said instead. "Right now is just a challenging phase." He didn't look convinced, but he dropped it, returning to his cereal while I pretended the coffee in my hands wasn't shaking. 2 years and 3 months after I'd started documenting Derek's financial infidelity, my careful observation uncovered another layer to his deception. Derek had a best friend from college, Marcus Webb, who'd co-signed on several of the business loans. I'd always liked Marcus. He was genuine, funny, one of the few people in Derek's circle who'd treated me like an actual person instead of decorative furniture. I ran into Marcus at the grocery store on a Thursday afternoon, and he looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped, the posture of someone carrying weight they hadn't asked for. "Marcus, are you all right?" I asked, genuinely concerned. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. A decision being made. Meredith, can we talk? Maybe grab coffee? We sat in a corner booth at a chain cafe where nobody we knew would see us, and Marcus told me what Derek had done. He'd co-signed loans for the business 3 years ago when Derek was expanding, trusting his college friend completely. But Derek had started missing payments 8 months ago, and now the creditors were coming after Marcus. His credit was destroyed. He'd had to take out a second mortgage on his house to cover Derek's defaults. His wife was talking about separation because the financial stress was destroying their marriage. I tried talking to Derek about it, Marcus said, his voice hollow. He keeps promising he'll fix it, that it's just a temporary cash flow issue. But Meredith, I've seen the numbers. The business is failing. He's buried, and he's taking me down with him. I should have pretended ignorance, should have protected Derek's secrets to protect my own investigation. But looking at Marcus, a good man whose only crime was trusting his friend, I couldn't do it. I know, I said quietly. I know about all of it. The debt, the apartment, everything. Marcus's face went pale. The apartment? I told him about Amber, about the $4,200 a month Derek was spending to maintain his affair, while defaulting on business loans that were destroying Marcus's life. I watched Marcus's hands curl into fists on the table, watched his jaw tighten with the kind of rage that comes from betrayal so complete. It rewrites your understanding of someone you loved. What are you going to do? He asked finally. I'm going to wait, I said. Derek is planning something. I can feel it. And when he makes his move, I'll be ready. Can I help? Marcus's voice was steady now, purposeful. After what he's done to both of us, I want to help. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Can you document everything about the loans? Every missed payment? Every promise he broke? Every way he's destroyed your finances while pretending everything was fine? Already done, Marcus said grimly. I started documenting 3 months ago when my lawyer advised me to build a case against Derek if needed. I have everything. We exchanged information that day. 2 people Derek had betrayed, pooling our evidence, building a case that would eventually show the world who Derek Carlson really was beneath his expensive suits and charming smile. Marcus became my ally, checking in weekly with updates, adding pieces to the puzzle I'd been assembling for over 2 years. The final piece fell into place on a Tuesday in October, almost 3 years to the day after I'd first discovered Derek's hidden account. I was reviewing the mail when I saw it. An envelope from Hastings & Associates, the law firm Derek had paid $68,000 for personal legal services. Inside was a letter addressed to Derek, marked Confidential Attorney-Client Privilege, in bold red letters across the top. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew it could compromise any legal proceedings later. But I also knew that knowledge was power, and I was tired of being the only person in my marriage operating without complete information. I steamed it open carefully, using techniques I'd learned from a paralegal training seminar years ago, methods for accessing sealed documents in discovery. Inside was a detailed divorce strategy memo. The attorneys had laid out Derek's plan with brutal efficiency. File for divorce, claim the house and all business assets as separate property since they predated much of the marriage growth, argue that my unpaid labor had no monetary value since I'd never had an official employment contract, push for minimal spousal support on grounds that I was educated and capable of supporting myself, and request that I take primary custody of Owen since Derek's demanding work schedule made shared custody impractical. In other words, Derek wanted to leave me with nothing but our son, the one asset he'd explicitly described to his lawyers as a burden he was generously allowing me to shoulder. There was a timeline attached. Derek planned to file the first week of January, right after the holidays, when I'd be emotionally vulnerable and less likely to fight effectively. His lawyers recommended he document increased marital discord leading up to the filing, suggest marriage counseling that I would theoretically refuse, and create a narrative of a wife who'd become bitter and difficult while he'd tried everything to save the relationship. I read it 3 times, memorizing every word, every tactical recommendation, every piece of advice on how to leave your wife of 13 years with nothing to show for her unpaid labor except a teenage son and a shattered sense of self-worth. Then I carefully resealed the envelope, placed it exactly where I'd found it in the mail stack, and went to my computer. I had 3 months before Derek planned to file. 3 months to prepare, to position myself, to make sure that when he finally made his move, he'd discover that his careful planning had led him not to victory, but to the edge of a cliff he'd built himself. I called Uncle Frank first, then Rachel, then Sandra from the law firm. I told them Derek's timeline, showed them the divorce strategy memo I'd photographed before resealing it. Sandra whistled low when she read it. "This is good for you, actually," she said. "This shows premeditation, strategy, planning while you were still working for free building his business. This is going to make his lawyer's job very difficult when we show a judge that he was plotting your financial devastation while you were still contributing unpaid labor." "What do I do now?" I asked. "You wait," Sandra said. "You let him think he's in control. You don't change anything about your behavior. And when he files, we'll be ready with a counter case that will make his attorneys wish they'd advised him to negotiate fairly from the start." So I waited. I went through Thanksgiving playing the grateful wife, cooking a turkey I couldn't afford, while Derek invited colleagues over to admire our beautiful home built on a foundation of debt. I smiled through Christmas, wrapping presents bought on credit cards that were already maxed out, watching Owen open gifts while knowing his father planned to abandon us in 2 weeks. And on New Year's Eve, while Derek kissed me at midnight with lips that tasted like champagne and lies, I thought about justice, not revenge. Revenge was emotional, messy, unfocused. Justice was precise. Justice was letting a man who'd spent 13 years taking advantage of your unpaid labor discover that his careful plans had a fatal flaw. He'd underestimated me. He'd spent so long thinking of me as the supportive wife, the unpaid employee, the woman who'd accept whatever he decided to give her, that he'd forgotten I'd spent 4 years at a law firm learning how legal warfare worked. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 11 years learning every aspect of his business, which meant I knew exactly where every financial body was buried. Most fatally, he'd forgotten that I'd had a grandmother who'd loved me enough to teach me the one lesson that would save me. Always keep something that's just yours. Derek had no idea that while he was plotting with expensive lawyers, I'd been building my own case with free help from people who actually cared about me. He had no idea that his meticulously planned divorce was about to become the biggest mistake of his life. The first Tuesday of January arrived cold and clear. Derek came home at 7:30 that evening, unusually early, with the expression I'd learned to recognize. The face he made when he was about to do something he'd convinced himself was noble. "Meredith, we need to talk," he said. And I knew this was it, the moment 3 years of patience had been building toward. I looked up from the dinner I was preparing, played my role one final time. "Of course. What's wrong?" He took a deep breath, and I watched him prepare to deliver the speech he'd probably practiced in his apartment with Amber, the one where he'd sound reasonable and regretful instead of calculating and cruel. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us like smoke, and I felt time slow down in that moment. 3 years of documentation, 3 years of careful planning, 3 years of playing the role of devoted wife while building my case. It all came down to this moment in our kitchen, with the smell of roasting chicken filling the space between his declaration and my response. I turned off the stove, set down the wooden spoon I'd been holding, and looked at him with what I hoped appeared to be shock. "What?" "I want a divorce," Derek repeated, and I could see the relief in his shoulders at saying it out loud, at finally dropping the pretense he'd been carrying. "This isn't working anymore, Meredith. We both know it. We've grown apart. I think it's best if we end things before they get worse." I sat down at the kitchen table, let my hands shake just enough to be visible. I don't understand. We just had Christmas together. I know this is hard, he interrupted, using that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years, the one that said he was being patient with someone who couldn't quite keep up. But I've been thinking about this for a long time. We're not happy. You're not happy. I'm not happy. The kindest thing we can do for each other is acknowledge that and move on. I noticed he didn't mention Owen. Our son was upstairs doing homework, headphones on, unaware that his father was dismantling our family in the kitchen below. Derek had chosen this moment carefully, a Tuesday evening when Owen would be distracted, when I'd be tired from a day of unpaid labor on his behalf, when my defenses would be down. "What about Owen?" I asked, my voice small and uncertain, exactly the tone Derek expected. "Owen will be fine. Kids are resilient." Derek pulled out the chair across from me, sat down like we were having a reasonable discussion instead of him detonating our 13-year marriage. "Look, I've thought about this practically. I'll take the house, the cars, the business, all the assets. They're technically in my name anyway, and I built the company. You can have primary custody of Owen since you're home more, and I'll pay reasonable child support. We can be civilized about this." There it was, the script his lawyers had prepared, delivered with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. Take everything of value. Leave me with the burden of our son. Frame it as generous that he'd pay child support as if that wasn't a legal obligation. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Even though I'd known this was coming, even though I'd prepared for this exact moment, hearing him casually claim ownership of everything I'd helped build for 13 years still felt like a physical blow. "You don't have to say anything right now," Derek said, and I saw something that looked almost like kindness in his eyes. The kind of kindness someone shows when they believe they're being merciful. "Take some time to process this. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I think it would be good if you got your own legal representation so this can be fair for both of us." Fair. He used the word fair while plotting to take everything and leave me with nothing. I wanted to laugh at the audacity, but I kept my face neutral, shocked, the perfect picture of a blindsided wife. "Where will I go?" I asked. "You can stay in the house while we figure things out," Derek said. "I'll move into the guest room for now." "But Meredith, I need you to understand something. This business, this house, everything we have, I built it. You helped, and I'm grateful for that. But at the end of the day, my name is on everything. My credit, my risk, my work. Your debt, I thought. Your lies, your fraud." But I said nothing, just nodded like I was absorbing this information. Like I hadn't spent 3 years documenting every way he'd built his empire on my unpaid labor and questionable financial decisions. Derek stood up, and I saw relief flood his features. This had gone easier than he'd expected. I was reacting exactly how he'd predicted, with shock and submission instead of anger and resistance. "I think it's best if we tell Owen together," he said. "Maybe this weekend? Give you some time to adjust first?" "Okay," I said quietly. He left the kitchen, and I heard him climb the stairs to pack his things for the guest room. I sat at the table for 10 minutes, my mind racing through everything I knew, everything I'd documented, everything that was about to unfold. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Sandra, my attorney. He filed tonight. Verbal notice. Wants house, cars, business, everything. Exactly as the memo predicted. Her response came 30 seconds later. "Perfect. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. We move on our timeline, not his." The next 2 weeks were an exercise in humiliation. Derek moved into the guest room but treated our house like it was already solely his property. He'd have friends over without telling me. Men from his business circle who'd nod politely at me before retreating to Derek's study to drink expensive whiskey and talk about deals I'd helped facilitate but would never be credited for. He started bringing Amber around during the day when he thought I'd be out running errands. I came home early one Wednesday to find her in my kitchen, making a smoothie in the blender I'd gotten as a wedding gift from my grandmother, wearing one of Derek's shirts like she belonged there. She startled when she saw me, had the decency to look briefly uncomfortable before recovering with that practiced smile. "Oh, Meredith, Derek mentioned you'd be out longer." "It's my house," I said, setting my grocery bags on the counter with deliberate calm. "I don't need permission to come home early." Amber's smile faltered. "Of course. Derek and I were going over some marketing materials for the business." I looked at the counter. No laptop, no folders, no materials. Just her smoothie and the casual intimacy of someone who'd been told she was moving in soon, who'd been promised a future in my house with my things once I was conveniently removed. "The business I built," I said quietly. "The one I worked on for 11 years without a single paycheck. Did Derek mention that during your marketing discussions?" Amber's face flushed. "I should go." "Yes," I agreed. "You should." She left quickly, and I heard her low voice talking to Derek in the driveway, heard his car door slam, heard them drive away together. I stood in my kitchen, my grandmother's blender still on the counter, Amber's half-finished smoothie abandoned in the sink, and I felt something cold and certain settle deeper into my chest. They thought this was over. They thought I'd fold quietly, take whatever Derek offered, disappear gracefully so they could move into my life and pretend I'd never existed. They had no idea what was coming. That night, Derek came home late and found me in the living room going through photo albums, our wedding pictures spread across the coffee table. I'd staged this carefully, the grieving wife reviewing happier times, a performance for the narrative he was building. "What are you doing?" he asked, and I heard something that might have been guilt in his voice. "Remembering when you loved me," I said, not looking up, "or at least when I thought you did." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "Meredith, this isn't about love. People change. Relationships run their course. It doesn't mean what we had wasn't real." I looked up at him then, let him see the tears I'd worked up. "Did you ever love me? Or was I always just free labor with a warm body attached?" "That's not fair," he said, and the guilt was gone, replaced by defensiveness. "I gave you a good life. This house, financial security, the ability to be home with Owen." "Financial security?" I laughed, and it came out bitter and broken. "Derek, I don't even have a salary. I don't have a retirement account with the company. I don't have health insurance in my own name. After 13 years, I have nothing to show for building your business except a title you never bothered to make official." "You have Owen," Derek said, like our son was a consolation prize instead of a human being. "Right. I have Owen, and you have everything else." I turned back to the photo albums. "When do I need to be out?" I felt him hesitate, heard the internal calculation as he decided how generous to appear. "Take your time. A few months, maybe. We'll work out the details with the lawyers." A few months to find somewhere to live with no income, no savings he knew about, no assets in my name. A few months to dismantle my life and rebuild from nothing while he moved his girlfriend into the home I'd helped pay for with unpaid labor. "That's very generous," I said, and let the words drip with enough sarcasm that he'd notice, but not enough that he'd realize I was mocking him. He left me alone with the photo albums, and I heard him on the phone in the guest room, his voice low and intimate in a way it hadn't been with me in years, talking to Amber probably, telling her how well it was going, how I was taking it quietly, how soon they could be together without pretense. The weekend came, and Derek suggested we tell Owen about the divorce over Saturday breakfast, a meal I was expected to cook, even though my marriage was ending and my life was imploding. I made pancakes, Owen's favorite, and watched my son's face crumble as Derek delivered the news with practiced sympathy. "Your mother and I have decided to separate," Derek said, reaching across to pat Owen's hand like he was being comforting instead of devastating. "It's not anyone's fault. Sometimes adults just grow apart, but we both love you very much, and that won't change." Owen looked at me, his eyes asking questions I couldn't answer with Derek sitting there controlling the narrative. "Mom, it's true," I said softly. Things have been difficult for a while. Your father thinks this is for the best. Pete, where will we live? Owen's voice cracked on the question, and I saw Derek wince slightly. The first genuine emotion he'd shown through this whole performance. You'll stay here with your mom for now, Derek said. I'll get an apartment nearby. You can visit whenever you want. This doesn't change anything between us, son. But it changed everything. And Owen knew it. He'd watched Derek spend the last 2 weeks moving into the guest room, watched Amber come and go, heard the whispered phone calls. He was 15, not stupid. He knew his father was leaving us, knew Derek had chosen a different life, and no amount of, you can visit whenever, would make that betrayal sting less. Owen excused himself without finishing his pancakes, retreated to his room, and I heard the click of his lock engaging. Derek looked uncomfortable for approximately 30 seconds before checking his phone, mumbling about work emails and disappearing into his study. I cleaned up breakfast alone, loaded the dishwasher, wiped down counters that were probably mortgaged 3 times over, and thought about justice. That afternoon, Derek's mother showed up unannounced, a woman I'd always called Susan, but who'd never quite warmed to me in 13 years of marriage. She swept into the house like she owned it, her designer handbag probably worth more than I'd earned in the last year of work I'd done for free. "Meredith, dear," she said, though her tone suggested I was anything but dear. "Derek told me about the separation. I wanted to come help you pack." "Pack?" I set down the book I'd been pretending to read. "I'm not packing yet. Derek said I had a few months." Susan's smile was tight, artificial. "Well, I thought it might be easier to start early. Get organized, you know." I brought some boxes. She hadn't brought boxes. She'd brought garbage bags, the heavy-duty black kind you use for actual trash. And the message was clear. My 13 years of marriage, my belongings, my life, all of it was garbage to be efficiently removed. "I also thought we should go through the house together," Susan continued, walking through my living room like she was conducting an inventory. "Some of these items are family heirlooms. The silver tea service in the dining room belonged to Derek's grandmother. And this artwork, Derek chose all of it. It wouldn't be right for you to take things that are rightfully his." I watched her pick up a photograph of Owen, one I'd taken at his 10th birthday party, one I'd had professionally framed. "Even the photos?" I asked quietly. "Well, you can have copies made, certainly, but the frames are quite expensive. Derek bought them." Susan set the photo down and turned to me with what she probably thought was kindness. "Meredith, I think it's important we're realistic about this situation. You married my son when you were quite young. You didn't bring much to the marriage. It's only fair that you don't take much from it. I didn't bring much. I'd only brought 13 years of unpaid labor, business expertise, the ability to keep Derek's company running while he was out building debt and maintaining a mistress. I'd only brought midnight feedings and homework help, and being the parent who actually showed up while Derek pursued his empire. I'd only brought trust and loyalty and love that I'd given freely while he commodified every aspect of our relationship. "What do you think I should take?" I asked, genuinely curious about how little Derek's mother thought I deserved. Susan looked around the living room with an appraising eye. "Your personal clothing, of course. Perhaps the kitchenware that isn't part of a set. Some of Owen's things, though Derek will want to maintain his room here for visits. I think $40,000 or $50,000 would be a generous settlement, given the circumstances. $40,000 or $50,000 for 13 years of marriage and 11 years of unpaid labor. For building a business from napkin sketches to multi-million-dollar contracts. For raising Derek's son while he built his empire and his secret life. I thought about the $1,600,000 in debt Derek had accumulated. I thought about the $200,000 of negative equity he was so eager to claim as his assets. I thought about how perfectly this moment would play in court when my attorney presented it as evidence of the family's attitude toward my contributions. "That seems reasonable," I said, and watched Susan's expression shift to satisfied surprise. She'd expected me to fight, to argue, to embarrass myself with demands for more. My quiet acceptance confirmed everything she'd believed about me, that I was weak, easily manipulated, grateful for whatever scraps I was thrown. "I'm so glad you're being sensible about this," Susan said. "Derek was worried you might make things difficult, but I told him you'd always been such an agreeable girl." An agreeable girl. At 35, with a 15-year-old son and 13 years of marriage, I was still just an agreeable girl in their eyes. Not a partner, not a builder, not someone whose contributions had value. Just a girl who should be grateful for whatever they decided to give her. Susan left an hour later, satisfied that she'd put me in my place, that the divorce would proceed smoothly with me accepting my minimal settlement, like the agreeable girl she believed me to be. I watched her drive away in her luxury car, probably another lease Derek was paying for while defaulting on Marcus's loans, and I called Sandra. "Derek's mother just tried to negotiate my settlement," I said. "$40,000 to $50,000 and my personal clothing." Sandra was quiet for a moment. "Did you get that on recording?" "Every word." I'd learned to record every conversation months ago. Kept a small device in my pocket that captured audio legally in our one-party consent state. "She also wants me to pack my things in garbage bags and leave the family heirlooms." "Perfect," Sandra said, and I heard the smile in her voice. "Keep being agreeable, Meredith. Let them think they're winning. Because when we present this in court, the family's attitude toward your unpaid labor, their attempt to minimize your contributions, their willingness to throw you away like garbage, it's going to make the judge very interested in hearing about everything else Derek has been hiding." 3 weeks after Derek asked for divorce, he served me with papers. Official documents delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the envelope, like he knew he was delivering a weapon designed to destroy my life. I read through them in my car, parked in the grocery store parking lot where I'd pulled over after being served. Derek was asking for full ownership of the house, the cars, the business, and all associated assets. He was offering me $40,000 in total settlement, and shared custody of Owen weighted 60-40 in my favor, since, as his petition stated, respondent has more flexible schedule to accommodate minor child's needs. Flexible schedule. Like my lack of paid employment was a lifestyle choice, instead of 13 years of working for free to build his company. I called Sandra from the parking lot, read her the petition word for word. "Don't respond yet," she said. "Let him think you're scared, overwhelmed, processing. We have 30 days to file our counter-petition, and we're going to use every single one of them to prepare. Because, Meredith, when we respond, we're not just answering his petition. We're going to educate Derek Carlson on exactly what happens when you spend 13 years taking advantage of someone you underestimated." That night, Derek came home and found me at the kitchen table with his divorce petition spread in front of me. My eyes red from crying that was only partially performed. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I'm sorry it had to be this way," he said, "but it's better to have everything in writing. Make it official." "You're really giving me $40,000, I said, my voice flat. "For 13 years. And Owen," Derek added quickly, "you're getting primary custody. That's worth something." "Our son isn't an asset to be divided," I said. "He's a human being. You know what I mean." Derek loosened his tie, looked at me with what might have been genuine regret beneath the relief of having officially started the process. "Look, 40,000 is just the opening offer. If you get a good lawyer, we can probably negotiate more. I'm not trying to leave you with nothing, Meredith. I just want what's fair." There was that word again, fair. As if any part of this was fair. As if 13 years of unpaid labor while he accumulated debt and maintained a mistress added up to fairness in any calculation that included human decency. "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said quietly. "Sandra Winters. She used to work at Morrison and Associates with me." Derek's face tightened slightly. "Sandra Winters? She's a family attorney now?" specializes in high-asset divorces and business valuation, I confirmed, watching his expression carefully. She said she'd be happy to represent me, something about our case being particularly interesting. I saw it then, the first flicker of uncertainty crossing Derek's face. Sandra Winters had a reputation, one Derek would know if he'd done any research. She was the attorney other attorneys warned their clients about, the one who found assets hidden in offshore accounts and businesses valued fraudulently low. She was expensive, aggressive, and very, very good at her job. "How are you paying for her?" Derek asked, and I heard the question beneath the question, "Where did you get money I don't know about?" "She's working on contingency," I lied smoothly. "Said she believes in my case." That was partially true. Sandra was working for reduced rates because I'd helped her win a case 5 years ago when I was still at Morrison and Associates, had found a document in discovery that had been misfiled and overlooked. She'd told me then that she owed me, and now she was making good on that debt. But Derek didn't need to know the details. He just needed to know that I wasn't going to roll over quietly. "That's fine," Derek said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "I'm glad you have representation. Makes things cleaner." He left me alone with the divorce papers, and I heard him making phone calls from the guest room, his voice tense and low. Probably calling his attorney, probably expressing concern about Sandra Winters, probably being told not to worry because they had everything documented and planned. What they didn't have was any idea what I'd been documenting for 3 years. What they didn't know was that while Derek had been planning my destruction for months, I'd been planning his education for years. What they couldn't imagine was that the agreeable girl they'd dismissed so easily had learned everything she needed to know about legal warfare from 4 years at one of the best firms in the city. And she'd been preparing for this war since long before they'd even thought to draw their weapons. The battle was about to begin. And Derek Carlson had brought a knife to a gunfight without even realizing his opponent had been stockpiling ammunition for 3 years. I sat across from Sandra in her corner office that overlooked the city, surrounded by law books and case files, the mid-February sun streaming through windows that probably cost more than my first car. She'd been reviewing my documentation for 6 hours straight, occasionally stopping to make notes or shake her head in what looked like professional admiration mixed with personal disgust at what Derek had done. "This is extraordinary," she said finally, setting down the last folder. "Meredith, in 20 years of practicing family law, I've never seen documentation this thorough from someone who isn't an attorney. You have everything. Bank statements, mortgage documents, lease agreements, photographic evidence, witness statements from Marcus about the business loans, recordings of conversations with Derek's mother. You've built a case that most divorce attorneys would need 6 months and $50,000 in discovery to assemble. I had 3 years and a really good teacher," I said, thinking of my old boss at Morrison and Associates who drilled into me the importance of documentation. "What happens now?" Sandra smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel very nervous. "Now, we file our counterpetition. And Meredith, we're not just responding to Derek's requests. We're going on offense." She pulled out a legal pad and started outlining our strategy. We would acknowledge that Derek wanted the house, the cars, the business, and all associated assets. We would agree to those terms with one critical addition: Derek would also be accepting all associated liabilities. Every mortgage, every business debt, every loan, every obligation attached to those assets would transfer to him completely. "But won't the court split the debts anyway?" I asked. "Normally, yes," Sandra agreed. "But Derek's petition specifically claims these assets as separate property that he built independently. He's arguing that your contributions were minimal, that you have no ownership stake. So we're going to take him at his word. If the assets are solely his, then the liabilities are solely his. And we're going to make very, very sure he understands exactly what he's accepting." Over the next 3 weeks, Sandra and her team assembled our counterpetition with surgical precision. We documented every hour I'd worked for Carlson Development without compensation, conservatively estimated at 60 hours per week for 11 years, valued at the market rate for a business manager with my qualifications. That alone totaled approximately $2,100,000 in unpaid labor. We included Marcus's testimony about the business loans Derek had defaulted on, the ones that were destroying Marcus's credit and marriage. We attached the life insurance policy with my forged signature. We provided evidence of the apartment Derek maintained for Amber, complete with lease agreements and credit card statements showing furniture purchases and weekly grocery deliveries for two. But the masterpiece was the financial disclosure Sandra's forensic accountant prepared. Every debt, every obligation, every liability attached to the assets Derek claimed as solely his. The 3 mortgages totaling $950,000 on a house worth $720,000, the $420,000 in business debts, the $95,000 in car lease balloon payments, the cryptocurrency losses, the gambling debts, the tax obligations. We presented it all in a document titled Complete Asset and Liability Disclosure that showed, in meticulous detail, that Derek wasn't fighting for an empire worth millions. He was fighting for the legal right to drown in $200,000 of negative equity while I walked away free. He's going to try to back out when he sees this, I said, reviewing the final draft. He's absolutely going to try, Sandra agreed. But here's the beautiful part. His own petition works against him. He's spent months telling anyone who will listen that he built this business alone, that these assets are his separate property, that your contributions were minimal. He's on record with his attorney, with the mediator, with his own mother saying, "You deserve almost nothing." If he suddenly tries to claim these are marital assets he wants to split, every statement he's made undermines his credibility. She leaned back in her chair, satisfaction evident in her expression. And the life insurance policy with the forged signature? That's potential fraud. I've already filed a complaint with the insurance company and flagged it for the district attorney's office. Even if they don't press charges, it shows a pattern of deception that makes everything else he's claimed suspect. We filed our counterpetition on March 15th, exactly 29 days after Derek served me. His attorney called Sandra within 2 hours of being served, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. I wasn't on the call, but Sandra played me the recording afterward. Your client is making serious allegations about Mr. Carlson's business practices and personal conduct. These claims are inflammatory and potentially defamatory. My client is providing documented evidence of assets and liabilities, Sandra replied calmly. Everything in our filing is supported by bank records, legal documents, and sworn testimony. If Mr. Carlson disputes any of the financial information, I'm happy to discuss it in discovery. In fact, I'd welcome a full forensic audit of Carlson Development's books. I'm sure that would clarify any questions about the company's true financial position. There was a long pause. Derek's attorney knew what Sandra knew. The last thing Derek wanted was a forensic audit that would expose the full extent of his financial mismanagement to creditors, investors, and potentially the IRS. My client is willing to negotiate, the attorney said finally. Wonderful, Sandra said. My client is willing to accept Mr. Carlson's original proposal with our documented corrections to the asset and liability distribution. He gets everything he asked for, the house, the cars, the business, along with complete responsibility for all associated debts and obligations. We're not asking for spousal support, division of business assets, or any claims on future earnings. Just the $40,000 he originally offered and primary custody of their son. Yerk, that's not, the attorney started. That's exactly what your client proposed, Sandra interrupted. We're simply ensuring full disclosure of what he's actually receiving. If Mr. Carlson wants to renegotiate the entire settlement, we can certainly do that. but it will require a complete reassessment of Mrs. Walsh's contributions to the business over 13 years, which our valuation places at approximately $2,100,000 in unpaid labor. We can present that case to a judge if Mr. Carlson prefers." The call ended shortly after, and Sandra looked at me with satisfaction. "He's trapped. If he accepts, he takes all the debt. If he fights, we go to court and present evidence of your unpaid labor plus his financial fraud. Either way, you walk away clean." "What about Amber?" I asked. "Does she know about any of this?" Sandra's smile turned sharp. "I took the liberty of sending her a courtesy copy of our financial disclosure, just in case she was making long-term plans based on incomplete information about Mr. Carlson's actual net worth." 2 days later, Derek showed up at the house unannounced, his face pale and drawn in a way I'd never seen. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in a week, the confident swagger completely gone. "We need to talk," he said, and I heard desperation in his voice. "My attorney said all communication should go through her," I replied, standing in the doorway without inviting him in. "Meredith, please, just 5 minutes. No lawyers, no recording, just us." I should have said no. Sandra would have told me to say no, but I'd been waiting 3 years for this moment, for Derek to realize what he'd lost, what he'd thrown away, what he'd destroyed, and I wanted to see it in person. I stepped onto the front porch, pulling the door closed behind me. The March evening was cold, and I wrapped my cardigan tighter while Derek paced the length of the porch like a caged animal. "Did you know?" he finally asked. "About all the debt? About how bad things really were?" I looked at him steadily. "I've been managing your books for 11 years, Derek. What do you think?" His face crumbled. "How long?" 3 years, I said. "I found the hidden account 3 years ago. Then I found everything else. And you never said anything." It wasn't a question, more like an accusation wrapped in disbelief. "You never asked," I replied. "You were too busy planning your exit strategy with expensive lawyers and maintaining your girlfriend in a luxury apartment to notice that I was doing actual accounting instead of just data entry." Derek ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from years of marriage as his tell for genuine stress. "Amber left. She saw the financial disclosure and said she didn't sign up for this. She signed up for a wealthy real estate developer," I said. "Not a man drowning in debt he accumulated through gambling, cryptocurrency speculation, and maintaining a double life. Can't really blame her for having standards, even if they are purely financial." "This isn't funny, Meredith." "No," I agreed. "It's really not. None of this is funny. Not the 13 years I worked without pay. Not the $1,600,000 in debt you accumulated while I was helping build your company. Not the apartment you rented for your mistress while defaulting on loans that are destroying Marcus's life. Not the life insurance policy you took out on me with a forged signature. None of it is even slightly funny." Derek leaned against the porch railing, and I saw his hands shaking. "I can't take all that debt. It'll destroy me. The business will collapse. I'll lose everything." "You asked for everything," I reminded him gently. "You very specifically stated in your divorce petition that these assets were yours alone, built by your work, your risk, your investment. I'm just agreeing with you. You built it, you get it, all of it, including the foundation of debt you built it on. We can renegotiate," he said quickly. "Split everything 50-50, the assets and the debts. We were married 13 years. We should split it fairly. Now you want fair?" I laughed, and it came out bitter. "When you thought you were getting the empire and leaving me with $40,000 and our son, that was fair. When your mother was packing my life into garbage bags and taking family heirlooms I'd lived with for 13 years, that was fair. When you were telling your attorney I contributed minimally to your success, that was fair. But now that you understand what you're actually getting, suddenly you want to renegotiate fairness? Meredith, please." His voice broke. "I made mistakes. I know I did. But this will ruin me. The creditors, the business partners, Marcus, when they all call in the debts, I'll have nothing. I'll lose the company, the house, everything. I'll end up bankrupt. I looked at my husband of 13 years, the man I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, the man who'd repaid that love by treating me like unpaid labor and planning my systematic destruction. I felt something that might have been pity, but it was distant, muted, buried under 3 years of careful documentation and strategic planning. You wanted the divorce, Derek. You wanted everything that was yours. Congratulations. You're getting exactly what you asked for. I can't accept these terms, he said desperately. I'll fight this. I'll take it to court. You'll what? I interrupted. Present your case to a judge? Explain how you accumulated $1,600,000 in secret debt while your wife worked for free? Show them the apartment you maintained for your girlfriend? The forged life insurance policy? The business loans you defaulted on while paying Marcus's credit? The 13 years of unpaid labor you're now claiming was minimal contribution? I stepped closer to him, looked him directly in the eyes. Derek, I have 3 years of documentation. I have witness testimony. I have financial records that your own accountant will have to verify under oath. I have recordings of your mother offering me garbage bags to pack my life and saying I deserve $40,000 for 13 years of marriage. I have everything. And if you force me to present it in open court, I will destroy not just your finances, but your reputation so completely that you'll spend the rest of your life explaining to people why your wife of 13 years walked away with almost nothing while you drowned in debt. You hid from everyone. Derek stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Who are you? I'm the woman who built your company, I said quietly. I'm the accountant who could have saved you from yourself if you'd ever bothered to treat me like a partner instead of free labor. I'm the wife who loved you enough to give 13 years of my life to your dreams. And I'm the person you underestimated so completely that you never saw this coming. I turned to go back inside, then paused. Sandra needs your response to our counterpetition by Friday. Accept the terms or prepare for discovery. Your choice. I left him on the porch and went inside, locked the door, and allowed myself to shake for exactly 5 minutes before pulling myself together. Owen was at a friend's house. Wouldn't be home for another hour. I had time to process this moment, this small victory in a war that was almost over. The mediation was scheduled for April 20th, and Derek showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit hung a little loose, and I noticed he wasn't wearing the luxury watch he usually sported. Probably sold it, I realized, trying to scrape together cash for attorney fees. Amber wasn't there. Marcus was, though, sitting in the waiting area with his own attorney, ready to testify about Derek's business practices if needed. He nodded at me when I arrived with Sandra, and I saw something like respect in his eyes. The mediation lasted 4 hours. Derek's attorney tried every angle, arguing that the debt valuation was inflated, that my unpaid labor estimate was unreasonable, that forcing Derek to accept all liabilities was punitive rather than equitable. Sandra countered each argument with documentation, precedent, and the simple fact that Derek had explicitly claimed these assets as his separate property built without my meaningful contribution. If the assets are separate, the liabilities are separate, she repeated calmly. My client is simply holding Mr. Carlson to his own stated position. Derek's attorney requested a private conference with his client. They were gone for 40 minutes, and when they returned, Derek looked defeated. My client will accept the terms, the attorney said, his voice tight. Full ownership of the house, vehicles, and business assets, along with complete responsibility for all associated liabilities. $40,000 cash settlement to Mrs. Walsh, primary custody of the minor child to Mrs. Walsh, with standard visitation for Mr. Carlson, and child support according to state guidelines. We need one addition, Sandra said. Mr. Carlson will sign a waiver acknowledging that he was represented by competent counsel, that he had the opportunity to conduct full financial discovery, and that he refused additional audit or valuation services. This waiver confirms he accepted the settlement with complete understanding of the assets and liabilities involved. Derek's attorney started to object, but Derek cut him off. "Fine, I'll sign it. I just want this over." The final hearing was scheduled for May 10th, a Tuesday morning that dawned clear and warm with that particular quality of spring light that makes everything look like a fresh beginning. I wore a simple navy dress, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I looked professional, composed, nothing like the broken woman Derek and his mother had expected me to be. Derek sat across the courtroom with his attorney, and I saw him glance at me several times with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe, or just the desperate hope that I'd somehow change my mind at the last minute and save him from the consequences of his own choices. The judge reviewed the settlement agreement, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she flipped through pages of asset and liability disclosures. She looked up at Derek with a slight frown. "Mr. Carlson, I want to ensure you understand what you're agreeing to. According to this disclosure, you're accepting ownership of assets valued at approximately $1,400,000, along with liabilities totaling approximately $1,600,000. This leaves you with a negative net worth of approximately $200,000. Additionally, you're paying your former spouse $40,000 in cash settlement. Are you certain you want to proceed with these terms?" Derek's attorney started to speak, but Derek cut him off again. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand. Your attorney advised you to conduct a full financial audit before finalizing this agreement, and you refused. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you acknowledge that you had the opportunity to negotiate different terms and chose to accept this settlement?" "Yes, Your Honor." Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Walsh, you're accepting $40,000 in cash settlement, primary custody of your minor child, and child support according to state guidelines. You're waiving all claims to the marital home, vehicles, business assets, and future business earnings. Do you understand and accept these terms?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said clearly. The judge signed the decree, and just like that, it was over. 13 years of marriage dissolved in a courtroom on a Tuesday morning, with Derek getting everything he'd asked for and me walking away with exactly what he'd offered. Except Derek's everything was actually nothing, and my nothing was actually freedom. Derek's attorney tried one last time as we left the courtroom. "Meredith, please. Derek wants to talk about restructuring the debt division. He's willing to give you half the house equity if you'll take half the liabilities." "There is no house equity," I reminded him. "The house is mortgaged for more than it's worth, and the settlement is finalized. If Mr. Carlson has questions about his financial situation, he should consult with his accountant." Worried, I walked out of the courthouse with Sandra, and we stood on the steps in the May sunshine while she reviewed the final decree one last time. "You did it," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "You got exactly what you wanted." "I got freedom," I corrected. "Everything else is just paperwork." The $40,000 Derek paid me went into a savings account I opened in my name only, a small cushion for emergencies and fresh starts. But I didn't need it to survive. I had the $430,000 in Owen's trust fund, money Derek had never known about, money Grandma had protected for exactly this situation. I rented a small apartment, just 2 bedrooms, in a neighborhood with good schools and a coffee shop on the corner where I could sit and sketch design ideas. The apartment had old hardwood floors that creaked, windows that needed weather stripping, and a kitchen barely big enough for one person. It was perfect. Owen moved in with me the week after the divorce was finalized. He'd been quiet and withdrawn during the whole process, splitting his time between Derek's house and mine, trying to process his father's choices. But on move-in day, as we unpacked boxes in our tiny apartment, He finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Mom, did you know about all of Dad's debt when you agreed to the divorce terms?" I stopped folding towels and looked at my son, this almost man who'd watched his father's empire crumble and was trying to make sense of what it meant. "Yes. So you let him take everything, knowing it would destroy him?" "I let him have exactly what he asked for," I said carefully. "Your father spent months telling lawyers, mediators, and judges that he built everything alone, that my contributions were minimal, that he deserved all the assets because they were his work and his risk. I just agreed with him. He wanted everything, and he got everything, including all the debt he accumulated while I was working for free." Owen was quiet for a long moment. "That's pretty badass, Mom." I laughed, surprised. "Language. Seriously, though." "Peachy." He sat down on the couch, our old couch that Derek had graciously allowed me to take since it didn't match Amber's aesthetic. "Everyone thought you got screwed in the divorce. Dad's mom told everyone you were getting almost nothing. But you planned this, didn't you? You knew exactly what you were doing." "Your grandmother taught me to always keep something that's just mine," I said. "And my years at the law firm taught me that information is more valuable than anger." "Your father underestimated me. He thought because I didn't fight for the house and the cars and the business that I was giving up. He didn't realize I was giving away debt disguised as assets." "What about Dad?" Owen asked quietly. "What's going to happen to him?" I sighed. This was the hard part, the part where I had to be honest about Derek's future without making Owen hate his father. "The business is probably going to fail. The creditors are already calling in debts now that the divorce is final. Marcus's attorney filed suit last week for the defaulted loans. The house will likely go into foreclosure because your father can't maintain 3 mortgage payments on a property that's underwater. He'll probably file for bankruptcy within the year." "And you knew all this would happen?" "I knew the numbers," I confirmed. "The math doesn't lie, Owen. Your father accumulated $1,600,000 in debt against assets worth $1,400,000. That's not a sustainable position. Eventually, the foundation collapses." Owen nodded slowly, processing. "He deserves it, doesn't he? For what he did to you, for the affair, for the lying, for treating you like you didn't matter." "Maybe," I said, "but that's not why I did it. I didn't do this for revenge, Owen. I did it for survival. Your father was planning to leave me with $40,000 after 13 years of unpaid work. No retirement, no health insurance, no assets in my name. At 35 years old, I would have been starting over with nothing except you and a resume with an 11-year gap. So I protected myself the only way I could. I documented everything. I kept my own money safe, and when he tried to take everything, I let him have it. Even knowing it would destroy him? He destroyed himself," I said gently. "I just refused to be destroyed with him." 3 months after the divorce was final, I enrolled in an interior design certification program at the community college, using a small portion of Owen's trust fund with Uncle Frank's approval, since it qualified as education that benefited our family. I'd always loved design, had dreamed of it when I was 23, before Derek asked me to give up everything to build his company. Now, at 35, I was finally building something for myself. My first client came through a friend of Rachel's, a woman named Patricia, who was recently divorced and wanted to redesign her new apartment as a symbol of her fresh start. We met over coffee, and she told me her story. 22 years of marriage, 3 kids, a husband who'd left her for someone younger. She'd gotten a decent settlement but felt lost, like she didn't know who she was without being someone's wife. "I want colors," she told me, her eyes bright with determination. "My ex-husband hated color. Everything in our house was beige or gray. I want to live somewhere that feels alive." We designed her living room in shades of coral and turquoise, her bedroom in deep purple with gold accents. We found artwork at estate sales and second-hand stores, refinished furniture she'd had in storage, created a space that was uniquely hers. When it was finished, She stood in her living room and cried. "This is the first place I've ever lived. That's just mine," she said. "Not my parents' house, not my husband's house, not something we compromised on together. This is mine." I understood exactly what she meant. Word spread through the network of divorced women, and suddenly I had more clients than I could handle. Women who were rebuilding, who wanted spaces that reflected who they were instead of who their husbands wanted them to be. Women who understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but creation. Building a life so authentic and beautiful that the old one fades into irrelevance. By September, I'd completed enough projects to build a portfolio website. Owen helped me set it up, his teenage tech skills far surpassing my own. We called it Fresh Starts Design, and the tagline was, "Building Spaces for New Beginnings." "That's perfect, Mom," Owen said when we launched it. "That's exactly what you're doing." Derek's business collapsed in October, 8 months after our divorce was finalized. The foreclosure notices went out, the creditors filed suit, and Marcus finally got a judgment against him for the defaulted loans. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances who called to tell me with a mixture of sympathy and satisfaction, like they expected me to gloat. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad for the man Derek could have been if he'd valued partnership over possession, if he'd treated our marriage like a collaboration instead of a zero-sum game where someone had to win and someone had to lose. I heard he moved into a small apartment across town, the kind with month-to-month leases and coin-operated laundry, a far cry from the luxury he'd maintained for Amber. He still saw Owen every other weekend, though their relationship was strained by Derek's choices and the unavoidable reality that Owen had watched his father try to destroy his mother and fail. Natalie, my former best friend who'd spent years reporting my movements to Derek, tried to reach out through social media with a long message about misunderstanding and hoping we could reconnect. I read it once, then blocked her without responding. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness, and I had no interest in maintaining relationships with people who'd actively participated in planning my destruction. Marcus, on the other hand, became an unexpected friend. He'd lost a lot because of Derek's fraud, but he'd salvaged his marriage and was slowly rebuilding his credit. We'd meet occasionally for coffee, two people who'd been burned by the same man, comparing notes on recovery. "You were smart," he told me one afternoon in November, "smarter than any of us gave you credit for. While I was panicking and Derek was scheming, you were playing chess." "I was surviving," I corrected. "There's a difference between strategy and survival. Strategy implies you have choices. I didn't. I had to protect myself and Owen, because no one else was going to do it." On the 1-year anniversary of Derek asking for divorce, I took Owen to dinner at a nice restaurant, the kind I could now afford with money I'd earned from my design business. We sat by a window overlooking the city, and I ordered wine while Owen got a fancy non-alcoholic mocktail that made him feel sophisticated. "Can I ask you something?" Owen said during dessert. "Always. Do you regret it? Any of it? Marrying Dad, spending all those years building his company, the way everything ended?" I thought about it, really thought about it. I regret that he didn't value what we built together. I regret that he chose debt and deception over partnership. I regret that you had to watch your father make choices that hurt people you love. But do I regret the years themselves? No, because those years taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. They taught me my value, my strength, my capacity for strategy under pressure. And they gave me you, which makes every difficult moment worth it. Owen smiled, and I saw glimpses of the man he was becoming, stronger than his father, kinder, more aware of how his choices affected others. "I'm proud of you, Mom, for how you handled everything, for not letting him destroy you." "I'm proud of you too," I said, "for how you've handled all of this with grace and maturity way beyond your years." We clinked glasses, my wine against his mocktail, and I felt something settle into place. Not happiness exactly, but something better, contentment. The bone-deep satisfaction of knowing I'd survived the worst someone could do to me and emerged stronger, freer, more myself than I'd ever been. 2 weeks before Christmas, I was painting a client's bedroom in a color she'd chosen called Sage Whisper when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Meredith? Derek's voice, hoarse and uncertain. I set down my paintbrush carefully. What do you need, Derek? He stopped, started again. I'm outside your apartment. Can we talk? Just for a minute? I should have said no. I should have reminded him that we had a parenting app for Owen-related communication, and everything else could go through attorneys. But curiosity won out, that dangerous human impulse to see how far someone has fallen when they've spent so long looking down on you. I went downstairs and found him standing by the building entrance, and I barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by jeans and a jacket that had seen better days. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt in a way that spoke of stress and missed meals. The watch was gone, the confident posture was gone, the swagger was completely gone. He looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and was trying to figure out how to refill himself. "You look different," I said, because it was true, and I didn't know what else to say. "I filed for bankruptcy last week," he said without preamble. "Lost the house, the cars, the business, everything. I'm living in a studio apartment and working as a property manager for someone else's company. Everything I built is gone. I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Not sorry he'd lost what he'd built on fraud and debt, but sorry that he'd learned his lesson the hard way. Sorry that Owen had to watch his father fall so far. "Are you?" Derek laughed bitterly. "You planned this. You knew exactly what would happen when I took those assets and all that debt. You engineered my destruction." "I didn't engineer anything," I said calmly. "You accumulated $1,600,000 in debt while I worked for free. You maintained a girlfriend in a luxury apartment while defaulting on business loans. You forged my signature on a life insurance policy. You asked for everything in the divorce, and I gave you exactly what you asked for. The destruction was already there, Derek. I just refused to go down with you." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "You were always smarter than I gave you credit for." "I was always exactly as smart as I am now," I corrected. "You just saw what you wanted to see. A devoted wife who'd work for free and ask for nothing. You underestimated me because it was convenient, because acknowledging my actual contributions would have required you to share credit and power. But I was always here, Derek. I was always the one keeping your business running while you were out playing empire builder." "I know that now," he said quietly. "Too late, but I know it." "Why are you here?" I asked. "If you came for an apology, I don't have one. If you came for money, I don't have any to spare. If you came to tell me I ruined you, you should know I don't accept that responsibility. What do you want?" Derek ran his hand through his hair, that old stress gesture. "I came to say I'm sorry for everything, for the affair, for the lies, for the way I treated you like unpaid labor instead of a partner, for planning to leave you with nothing after you gave me 13 years, for being so focused on what I thought I deserved that I couldn't see what I actually had. I'm sorry, Meredith. You deserved better than what I gave you." I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acknowledgement. He'd finally seen me, finally understood what he'd lost and what he'd thrown away. It didn't change anything. The marriage was still over, the damage was still done, but it mattered that he finally knew. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate you saying that." "Are you happy?" he asked. "In your new life, doing your design work, raising Owen. Are you happy?" I thought about my small apartment with the creaky floors and the kitchen barely big enough for one. I thought about my design clients, women rebuilding their lives and trusting me to help create spaces that reflected their authentic selves. I thought about Owen, thriving in a home where his mother wasn't invisible and unvalued. I thought about the money safely invested for his future, the education I was pursuing for myself, the mornings I woke up without anxiety about hidden debt, or secret apartments, or forged signatures. Yes, I said, I'm happy. More than I ever was in that big house with the 3 mortgages and all the pretense. Derek nodded, like he'd expected that answer. I should go. I wanted you to know I see it now. What you did, what you gave, what I threw away. I see it. He walked away, and I watched him get into an old sedan that had definitely seen better days. Watched him drive off into the December evening. I stood there for a few minutes, letting myself feel the weight of that conversation, the strange mix of vindication and sadness. Then I went back upstairs to my apartment, back to the client's bedroom I was painting in sage whisper, back to the life I was building with my own hands and my own money and my own vision, back to freedom. Owen came home that evening to find me finishing the client's bedroom, and he helped me clean brushes and pack up supplies. We ordered Thai food from the place around the corner and ate it straight from the containers while sitting on my drop cloths, laughing about our day. Dad called me this afternoon, Owen said casually, like he was mentioning the weather. He wanted to talk about Christmas. He can't afford presents this year. That's okay, I said. Christmas isn't about presents. That's what I told him. Owen took another bite of pad thai. I also told him I didn't need anything from him except for him to be honest and show up when he says he will. That seemed to hit him pretty hard. I looked at my son, this wise beyond his years teenager who'd learned from his father's mistakes instead of repeating them. You're a good person, Owen. Better than either of us deserved. I learned from the best, he said, and smiled at me in a way that made my chest tight with love and pride and gratitude that we'd both survived Derek's choices and come out stronger. On Christmas morning, Owen and I had breakfast in our small apartment. Pancakes and bacon, the kind of simple meal that tastes better because you're not pretending it's something it's not. We decorated a small tree, nothing fancy, just lights and handmade ornaments Owen had created when he was little. It was perfect in its imperfection. Real in a way the staged holidays in Derek's debt-financed house had never been. Owen opened his presents, a new laptop for college applications, some clothes, books he'd mentioned wanting. I'd used my design business earnings, money I'd actually earned with my name on the paychecks, and it felt different from all those years of spending Derek's money that was really debt disguised as success. I got you something too, Owen said, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a framed photograph he'd taken on his phone. Me in a client's living room, paintbrush in hand, looking at a color swatch with complete concentration. I was smiling slightly, absorbed in my work, and I looked happy. Actually, genuinely happy. When did you take this? I asked, touched. Last month, when I came to help you move that couch. You didn't even notice I was taking pictures. But Mom, that's you. That's who you are, when you're not trying to be what someone else needs. I wanted you to remember that. I set the frame on my bookshelf, right next to the photo of Owen at his 10th birthday party, the one Susan had tried to claim, because the frame was expensive. These were my treasures now, not things bought with credit cards or inherited from in-laws who never valued me, but moments captured in time that showed us surviving, rebuilding, becoming. Thank you, I said. It's perfect. 6 months later, on a warm June evening, I was putting the finishing touches on my biggest project yet, a complete house redesign for a woman who'd gotten a substantial divorce settlement and wanted to turn her new home into something spectacular. We'd worked together for 3 months, choosing every color and fixture and piece of furniture with intention. The result was stunning. A space that felt both elegant and livable, sophisticated and warm. This is exactly what I wanted, my client said, walking through her living room with tears in her eyes. This is who I am. Thank you for helping me see it. I took photos for my portfolio, and as I was packing up my supplies, My phone rang. Rachel, my sister, calling with news. "You'll never guess who I ran into at the grocery store," she said, and I could hear the glee in her voice. "Natalie, your former best friend and Derek's spy." "And?" I prompted, loading paint samples into my car. "She asked about you. Wanted to know how you were doing, if you'd forgiven her yet." I told her you were thriving, that you'd built a successful design business, and that Owen was doing great. You know what she said? "What?" "She said she'd hoped Derek would notice her after you left, that she'd been in love with him for years, thought once you were out of the picture he'd finally see her, but he never even looked at her twice. She wasted 20 years of friendship for a man who couldn't be bothered to remember her name half the time. She's still waiting, Meredith, still hoping he'll call." I felt a twinge of pity for Natalie, but it was distant, abstract. "That's sad. It's pathetic," Rachel corrected. "She destroyed a real friendship for a fantasy. Meanwhile, you walked away from all of it and built something real. You won, sis. Completely, totally won. But it didn't feel like winning. Winning implies someone else losing, implies competition and gamesmanship. This felt different, like I'd simply refused to lose myself in someone else's disaster, like I'd chosen survival over martyrdom, strategy over emotion, freedom over the illusion of security. I drove home that evening with the windows down, June air flowing through the car, thinking about where I'd been and where I was going. 36 years old, Owen about to start his junior year of high school, my design business growing steadily, my savings account slowly building. I had health insurance in my own name, a retirement account I contributed to monthly, an apartment lease with my signature only. I had nothing that belonged to Derek, and everything that belonged to me. When I got home, Owen was cooking dinner. He'd taken an interest in culinary arts and was experimenting with recipes. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs and possibility. "How was the big reveal?" he asked, stirring something on the stove. "Perfect. She loved everything." "Of course she did. You're really good at this, Mom. Like, professionally good. You should expand, hire some help, maybe get a real office space." I sat at our small kitchen table, watched my son cook with the confidence of someone who'd learned early that independence was valuable. Maybe someday. For now, I'm happy with how things are. And I was. Happy with my small apartment and my growing business, and my son who'd turned out kind despite his father's example. Happy with mornings that didn't start with anxiety about hidden debt, or forged documents, or secret apartments. Happy with the simple, fundamental knowledge that everything I had was mine. Earned, built, created through my own effort and vision. Later that night, after dinner and dishes and Owen retreating to his room for homework, I sat by my window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Derek was probably in his studio apartment, working his property management job, living with the consequences of choices he'd made when he thought he was untouchable. Somewhere out there, Amber was probably dating someone new, someone else's wealthy husband, still chasing the lifestyle she thought she deserved. Somewhere out there, Natalie was probably still waiting by her phone, still hoping Derek would finally see her after all these years. And here I was, in my small apartment with the creaky floors and the window that needed weather stripping, eating ice cream straight from the container, while reviewing design proposals for next month's projects. Free. Truly. Completely free. My phone buzzed with a text from a potential new client, a referral from Patricia, my first client, who apparently had been telling all her recently divorced friends about Fresh Start's design. "Hi, Meredith. My friend Patricia said you're a miracle worker. I just finalized my divorce after 18 years, and I need to turn my new condo into a space that feels like ME for the first time in my adult life. Can we meet this week?" I responded immediately, feeling that familiar spark of purpose. "Absolutely. I'd love to help you create your fresh start." Because that's what I did now. I helped women rebuild. I helped them see that endings could be beginnings, that losing everything could mean gaining yourself, that the best revenge wasn't destruction, but creation. Building a life so authentic, it made the old one look like a costume you'd been forced to wear. I'd spent 13 years building Derek's empire. Now I was spending my time building something better. A life, a business, a future that was entirely mine. No hidden debt, no forged signatures, no pretense about who I was or what I'd contributed. Just me, my work, my son, and the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the best thing you can do is let someone have exactly what they ask for, especially when what they're asking for is their own destruction disguised as victory. Derek had wanted everything, and I'd given it to him. Every asset, every liability, every consequence of 13 years of choices he'd made while I worked for free building his dream. And in return, I'd taken the one thing he'd thrown away, like it had no value, myself. Turned out, I was worth more than everything he'd lost, combined. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.